my colleague Pete Myers, who I'm privileged to introduce next, will provide specifically, especially the frame around endocrine disruption, which he's led at the forefront for now 30 plus years. Bethany Carney-Almroth will really speak to the ecotoxicologic effects, which do give us haunting warnings about the effects of human health. And then Nahan Karali will connect plastic directly with climate in a profound way, because inevitably, as Senator Whitehouse alluded to, you cannot disassociate plastic from petrochemicals. So that's the frame. And we won't be able to cover the entirety of the gamut of issues, but if I had to pick 3 people to set the stage, these are among the best. So it's my honor and privilege to ask Pete Myers to come to the floor. I've known Pete since I've been in the field. He's a godfather, a grandfather, literally, biologically, and for the field of endocrine disrupting chemicals. I'm going to keep my introductions in general at this meeting brief, but he's the chief scientist at Environmental Health Sciences and an adjunct professor of chemistry at Carnegie Mellon University in its Institute for Green Science. Pete, the floor is yours. Thank you.
As I walked into the hallway today, I was struck by how many faces I knew. What a wonderful crowd you all are. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to echo something Leo said. In fact, I was already prepared to say it, which is that we know a lot about plastics and health. We can always learn more. Science can always learn more. But we know enough to know that we're in deep shit right now. Technical term. And I thought I'd have a title, Plastic Conundrum, Health and, in honor of the classic line in improv theater, designed to stimulate discussion, because I wanted to stimulate discussion. Yes, and, well, this is health and. So I hope I use the right control mechanisms here. We do, as Leo said, we do know a lot. We need to know more. We will never know everything, but we know enough to act now. And that is not the right control. That is not the right control. There, okay. So this is my granddaughter. There's her mom. Shori Myers from Bloomberg. Sarah was born 2 months prematurely. She spent the first 2 months of her life in a NICU. A NICU is full of plastic. And I suspect that if Sarah knew the fullness of this story at some point when she's protesting with her mom or something, she's going to say, "Yay, I love plastic. It saved my life." Because it did. Plastic plays an interesting, sometimes positive role in our lives. But there's a different side to this specific story. How many of you remember the campfire in Northern California? Thousands of homes, certainly hundreds, if not thousands of homes were destroyed, and they had plastics in them. They were full of PVC plastic. They were full of all sorts of plastics. And the fires volatilized those chemicals and made them part of the smoke that left Paradise, California, well named, and went from where I'm not sure where the pointer is, if there is one. No. Oops. Okay. Okay. So this is where Paradise sits, Paradise, California, and the plume of smoke from Paradise went directly to the Bay Area in November of 2018 when Shori, my daughter, was mid-pregnancy. In January of 2019, I had learned that she had to have a cesarean, emergency cesarean, because of preeclampsia. That's when Sarah was born. And, whoops, I am not doing this well. This is what San Francisco smoke looks like. I was there when it happened. Worst air in San Francisco's history until then. It's gotten worse now. But as I thought about this for 15 seconds, I thought, is there a possible link between that smoke and preeclampsia? And I quickly found reports in the literature by some of my friends saying that certain plastic chemicals are risk factors for preeclampsia. And I thought, that doesn't sound good. It's not science to conclude that that's what happened to my granddaughter, but it's not implausible. And then Leo hit in 2024 with a brilliant paper doing a deep dive on the links between preterm birth and phthalates, one of the most notorious of the endocrine disrupting compounds. And he found that during 2018, there were something like 50,000 attributable cases of preterm birth associated with phthalates, 50,000 of a cost of $3.84 billion. I thought, maybe I was right. So here's the conundrum. This is a baby in a NICU, and plastic's saving that baby's life. Plastic can support life, but they are not inert. We used to think they were inert. In fact, a delegate from one of the plastic producing countries at the UN meeting this past summer proclaimed that plastics are inert, so you don't have to worry. We know they can undermine health. And certainly Senator Whitehouse acknowledges this. We know that the scale of production of plastics already overwhelms human and natural capability of management. Just look at this waste heap of plastic and look at the projected growth of the plastics industry over the next 30 years. We're right here, and that's where we're headed if we let it go. It's not conceivable that that growth can take place without deep, deep implications for human health and ecotoxicological health, and health of the planet. It's not going to work. We have to stand up and say, stop. So what are the plastic challenges to health? Well, we got the chemicals in plastics. These are things I've worked on for 30 years. And then we've got the micro nanoplastics, which Bethany will talk about a bit. I'll say a little bit here. This is a report that Jane Munka, who's right there, participated in compiling. The PlastChem report, and there's a QR code if you want to go to the PlastChem report. It's an awesome study published in April of this year, funded by the Nordic Council, Martin Wagner, other people that Jane and I work with. They found that there's something like 16,000 chemicals used to make plastic. Not every piece of plastic has 16,000, but across the broad sweep of plastic production, it involves at least 16,000 chemicals. 10,000 plus, almost 11,000, are without any hazardous data whatsoever. How can we let that happen? 4,200 of them are known to be hazardous. That's an astounding failure of the regulatory system and of the supply chain. What about EDCs and how do they figure in this? Endocrine disrupting compounds? Well, they hack hormone signaling. What we know about hormones is that There's a signaling system that conducts the symphony of life. They turn genes on and off, and they're vital to every bodily process that takes place. Infinitesimally small amounts of hormones determine how that symphony goes, determine whether or not it sounds good or sounds bad throughout life. And the cellular mechanisms, this is something people don't pay a lot of attention to, the cellular mechanisms in place throughout our bodies, they amplify those tiny signals to have huge effects. The amplification processes of the endocrine system are orders of magnitude, factors of 100,000 to a million. One guy a Nobel Prize for that in the late 1950s. Hacking these signals, these hormone signals with endocrine disruption disrupts those signals in many different ways. And now we have, over these last 30 years, built a pool of tens of thousands of scientific papers that show, with varying degrees of proof, some more, some less, that EDCs are associated with this word cloud of diseases. And the cloud just grows bigger and stronger every year. I want to give a couple of examples. We're long past breakfast, and we're a bit before lunch, presumably, so I can show the inside of a mouse. This is a mouse experiment done by a friend of mine, a man named Fred Von Saal at the University of Missouri, who is the world's expert on endocrine disruption and a compound called bisphenol A. And this is a normal mouse. It's a male. He's got testes, healthy, good red kidneys, a bladder that's normal, et cetera, et cetera. This is an adult mouse, more or less my age in mouse years. And it's fine. It's the control in this experiment. This is the experimental mouse. Its kidneys are completely necrotic. It's still a male. It's got testes. And the bladder there is about to explode. If that mouse had been allowed to live further, its bladder would have exploded. And what happened? Well, early in the fetal life of that mouse, bisphenol A altered epigenetic programming in the prostate gland. And that altered epigenetic programming meant that later in life, much later in life, as the balance between testosterone and estrogen evolved in the adult male, that tissue with epigenetic changes began to constrict around the urethra, the tube through which we and mice pee, and it ultimately constricted completely until the animal could no longer pee. This is a disturbing consequence, which began virtually undetectable unless you know a lot about epigenetics and the control of epigenetic episodes in prostates. But it had a consequence much later in life that for this mouse would have proven fatal. Another paper, which is quite striking and is particularly appropriate to talk about here in a children's hospital. This came out this summer. Is by a colleague of mine, Christos Simonides. They showed, because it was a big team, not listed there completely. And by the way, if you want the paper, there's the QR code. He showed that bisphenol A, just to focus again on that one chemical, bisphenol A alters the development of a mouse brain by interfering with aromatase activity. Now, aromatase, its main job is to convert testosterone to estrogen in the brain, and it does it elsewhere too, but that's what happens. And so when you interrupt aromatase activity with bisphenol A, you wind up with more testosterone in the mouse brain and the human brain than you would have normally. And they were able to show that prenatal VPA is associated with that brain aromatase function and autism spectrum disorders. Boys, human experiments or human observations, this was published this summer, show that mothers with high urinary BPA levels are 3.5 times more likely to have autism symptoms by age of 2 and 6 times more likely to be autistic by the age of 11. That's a huge epidemiological signal. And they were able to confirm in mouse experiments, which are part of this paper. It's a brilliant paper because it used both epidemiological work and mouse experiments to test key aspects of the hypothesis. They were able to show that the aromatase activity is affected by bisphenol A, but they were also able to show that the fatty acid 10-HDA ameliorates the effect, at least in the mouse. Now, I hope that some people here who are deeply involved in autism spectrum work pick up the challenge here. Does an intervention like that work in babies? So we've got the chemicals in plastics. I could go on forever talking about that, but I've given you 2 big examples. The second thing, which Bethany will pick up, are micro and nanoplastic particles, which are small and much smaller, to use technical terms. That we don't know nearly as much about those plastic particles as we know about the chemicals. We're learning fast, and what we're learning is not reassuring. As the senator said, he almost gave part of my talk. As the senator said, those particles are everywhere, mountaintops to deep sea trenches, oysters to birds to dogs to fish, and throughout our bodies. They are everywhere. And we don't have a lot of science yet showing what the consequences of those exposures are. We have a few papers that are coming out. The science on this is in its infancy. Mere presence of micro nanoparticles does not prove harm, mere presence. But the growing evidence is proving ugly. This is a paper somewhat controversial. I want to mention it, not because I'm confident it's right, but because I think we should know about it. And if someone here in the room is in possession of some cadavers or some patients who need their carotid arteries removed and sampled, please replicate this study. In this one, which came out of Italy a year ago, actually, no, I'm sorry, in March of this year, there's the QR code. It was published in New England Journal of Medicine, perhaps prematurely, but they showed that there was a hazard ratio of over 4, going on to 5. Patients with micro nanoparticles in the carotid arteries were more likely to die, more likely to develop cardiac problems than those people without them. And the hazard ratio was quite significant. Anyway, please replicate this work. So here we are at this point in the production curve. It is not sustainable. It shouldn't be increased an iota more. And that's what the UN treaty now is debating. Should there be a production cap on plastics production? I'm pleased to say, in part because of the work of some of my colleagues, we've convinced the US State Department that, at least we think we've convinced them, that their position should be there's going to be a cap on production. They weren't willing to go there for a long time, but they're there now, we think. You never know exactly where they're going to be. Anyone here from the State Department? Anyway, even if this production, what we know is if we go up to 2050 with our current projections, it's not sustainable. So where are we in this whole thing? I think we have a way out of this, and it involves the work by a lot of people in this room and work by many people around the world. First of all, to reduce the production of plastic, to use the UN treaty as the major mechanism by which that happens. The Endocrine Society, by the way, has been a major force in making this happen. And there are 2 people here, Marina and Joe, who have been major players in that, along with their colleagues from the Endocrine Society. We got to reduce production, and no question. We can do so without losing all the benefits of plastic by redesigning the plastic. I work in the chemistry department at Carnegie Mellon, in part because they want my information about what makes plastics hazardous to change molecules, to redesign the molecules that are being produced by chemical engineers and chemists. It is doable. It's not easy. It'll take a long time. There's fantastic work underway right now in Europe called the Chemicals Strategy for Sustainability. It has a couple of key elements, for me, the most important of which are, number one, it pays attention to endocrine science. It pays attention to what the endocrine society and of all of us have been emphasizing over these years. If you've got compounds that mess with the endocrine system, you need to use endocrine science to fix it. And if you want to hear a different answer to that, ask the FDA, who have been completely recalcitrant on these issues. So what we can, and the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability in Europe is pushing forward on efforts to redesign those chemicals using endocrine principles. And they have a big fund that's allocated to supporting the work by chemists to use the design signals that come from endocrinology to make safer materials. And thirdly, we need to reform the regulatory system. It is so embarrassing when you look at today's regulatory system at how it hinges completely on concepts and theories and bullshit that has been around for 4 centuries and ignores modern endocrine science. So this is Sierra today, last week. She's in good shape. The black around her eyes are not the result of premature birth. But we're pretty sure she's going to be okay, right, Tori? And we all can take a lesson from that the mistakes that we have been making by using plastics inappropriately, by thinking that they are inert and have no biological consequences, we can get ahead of that and do a better job and create a safer future. Thank you.